Somebody else is joining. Hey, Madhu.
Would you both like to introduce yourselves one by one? Manju, why don't you go ahead?
No, after Madhu.
Okay. Yeah, hi, Madhu. I guess I'm pretty well known to Bureau, I know, but I've worked pretty closely with them. I head the payment security practice at M2P Fintech.
I'm going to introduce myself as Manju. That's what I'm known here as, but my full name is Nagmanjunath. I handle the country operations for Bureau. That's about it. Yeah, so this is this Fraud Awareness Week, and Bureau is doing its bit to actually educate people on fraud. And therefore, as a part of this particular initiative, we are partnering with M2P, and Madhu is here representing M2P to be able to actually answer a few questions on fraud. And these questions, what we've taken is typically what people Google very frequently online to try to get answers on Google.
Okay, let's see what the first one is. Why is it called friendly fraud? So, yeah, I think that's it's sort of a tricky question, but there's no such fraud which is actually friendly. But what happens in case of friendly fraud is typically the customer himself tries to, he probably initiates a transaction knowingly or unknowingly. It could also be someone from the family or someone who gets access to his credentials or payment method who tries and initiates, and then after some time they contest that and they go back to the merchant and say, hey, it wasn't me who initiated this. So it actually becomes quite difficult for merchants to sometimes, disprove this. They have to go through a series of questions. They have to try and build certain models to identify such repeat offenders and patterns. But that's what friendly fraud is. I mean, it's different from the regular fraud patterns. It's actually initiated by the customer or someone known to him, and then they try and dispute it and raise a chargeback. So that's what friendly fraud is.
My first question is it legal to abuse discount codes? Right? I think we've all been guilty of this. Discount codes in our daily lives. If you look at Uber as well as Swiggy, some of these platforms, we probably would try to log in terms of our parents' accounts or friends' accounts to be able to actually take advantage of these discount coupons. But is it legal? It depends on the scale. If instead of just doing one or two, it starts impacting businesses when you're looking at committing these frauds, these so-called coupon abuses at a scale, wherein the organizations or the companies might want to take legal action against you.
How common is synthetic identity theft? Again, now synthetic identity means that you typically have a combination of credentials which are actually the genuine credentials of a customer, and also you have the fake certain data points that have been, and you combine it and create sort of a synthetic identity. Like, for example, someone could just get some of my KYC information, but suddenly use a different card or a different device or something, and then say, "Hey, this is Madhu here," and then completely start transacting. Right? How are you going to identify this? Because some aspects seem genuine, right? So the key here for any organization would be to actually establish really powerful patterns of learning. You got to look at different data sources. You got to keep continuously, your system has to be aware of different changes, whether there's been a modification in KYC, someone's stolen a phone, someone's accessed someone's email, and so on. Right? You need to keep a complete sort of a 360 view. That's the only way to identify, because credentials are being stolen every day. We probably don't even know when our data is being leaked. So yeah, synthetic identity is quite common nowadays. It's perhaps the easiest way for a fraudster to get access.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to. Yeah, no, I mean, I want to take a dig at my name while I'm trying to explain this, right? Because my name Manjunath, is very, very common. So now, if you procure like an Aadhaar card, or if you procure a PAN with a name which has Manjunath in it, so what you've done basically is you've taken my name and you've actually procured some sort of an identity, and then you're adding your own mix of phone numbers as well as your own addresses to that particular piece, and then you're creating a synthetic identity, right? Doesn't seem very complex, and that's what typically happens. That's the modus operandi of most people who involve in this kind of a fraud. But as what Madhu was mentioning, I mean, for individuals, they obviously have to be on top of like their accounts and their scores to be able to track this. But for organizations, what we as bureau or companies like us also do is we use AI tools, or we use even simple KYC sort of solutions. For example, matching. So this is what is there in the government database. But when you're also trying to match that particular person's video KYC, so when you're actually looking at liveness check and you're matching with what is there in the synthetic identity, that's like, I mean, in the sense it's an easier way to be able to actually detect if the person's the same as what he's claiming to be.
Yeah, so one of the other data points that typically is used and which I think is not easy for anybody to impersonate typically is like inherence factors like biometrics, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't easily get away with fingerprints and facial and behavioral biometrics, which is often behind the scenes. So these are the kind of technologies that need to be in place for you to identify as a human versus fraudster, human versus bot, and so on, and these sort of things, right? So that's what.
All right, my turn.
Okay.
How does cheating in multiplayer games work? Right. So yeah, I think I'd like to give an example. We both actually come from the same B school, right? And that's when I actually picked up poker. I'm not great at it. And imagine, like, I mean, in the sense, online, when a lot of, like, I mean, a lot of people actually play poker at this particular point of time. So it's typically like a table has 9 players, and imagine that if you have, instead of just one player who is yourself, you also create, like, I mean, multiple accounts, and then you are a part of that particular table. So what it does is it increases the odds of you actually having, like, I mean, a better hand, or, like, I mean, to be able to win that particular hand, right? Or if you have friends who colluding to actually be a part of that particular table. So that's very common in the gaming world, where you have multiple where there is cheating, which is prevalent in multiplayer games.
Can you hold apps accountable if your personal data is leaked? Okay, that's a very good question. It wasn't quite that easy in India, at least. For the rest of the world, I mean, most of the countries had their privacy protection laws in place, GDPR for Europe, UK, and then many other countries brought it in as well. But India has released the bill last year, and there's a fairly large sort of plan that they have to bring in privacy protection in here. And I think once that is completely in place, you have a law and everything else. I believe that you should be in a position to contest any of these leaks of your data, any situation where you might have your credentials being stolen, someone is it's compromised. I'm sure you can bring them to book, right? But so far it wasn't quite regarded that highly in India, privacy protection, but I think it's all coming up.
What's the best solution for fake orders, right? I'll actually take an example of one of the clients that we work with. Okay, so that's Purple. So a lot of these marketplaces, a lot of these e-commerce companies actually face this particular problem of fake orders. So they have what is known as return to origin. Typically, like, I mean, the easiest way to actually identify this is by seeing the pattern of that particular person's order history. So if you've seen this person actually making these returns very frequently, right, especially in COD orders, or if you try and see if there is an unusually large size order which is not according to his regular pattern, so you find something which is fishy, and then that's when you probably try and flag it off, right? So you try and see if many orders are coming in from the same device, or if you also try and see if, like, I mean, there are many different accounts which are created from the same device, as well as a lot of the companies saying that this is unlikely to be a genuine order or a genuine user. So you might want to take that into account.
Okay, let's see the next one. What actions can point towards money mule activity? Okay, so money mules have become one of the biggest threats in recent times. I mean, there's been a lot of sort of checks around anti-money laundering. They're looking at illegal activities, what sort of paths do financial crimes typically take, and the money mules knowingly or unknowingly become part of this system. Some of them are typically asked to open an account for and then there's a small amount deposit out there, and sometimes these accounts are open during very odd sort of, again, some festive period or offers and so on, and then suddenly there's no activity for 6 months. Again, you start seeing a spurt of activity after that. It could be quite unnatural sort of spend patterns suddenly, and transfers which could be even cross-border, for example. It could be within two very specific accounts. Again, this it's very different from typical account patterns do you see? That's one of the reasons why money mules can typically be caught either initially, right in the beginning, based on certain KYC, based on all the other information that you can have. You can probably track money mules, and then obviously keep a tab on these accounts. There's certain patterns that you can look for, and I think these are again regular good models that to be built to track these. Any thoughts on this?
Like, I mean, the banks right now are using sophisticated solutions to also try and identify this. Not just like, I mean, seeing a discrepancy in transactions, but even while onboarding users, they look at like to see if there is a discrepancy in the identities of that particular person who's creating that account, right? So I think that's where organizations, especially these fintechs, which are like innovative in nature, which try and help banks to triangulate information from multiple sources to see if the identities are legit or not. This is how you actually counter mules.
Is social engineering a type of technical attack? Yes and no. I guess it depends on the type of social engineering in place. More often than not, they do introduce, like we spoke about, phishing, sort of links that someone introduces, man-in-the-middle attacks that come through. People introduce some sort of a malware in someone's, phones. These sort of things happen. So there is a certain sort of technical part out there, but then ultimately there is a bit of a psychological play as well. So again, you have phishing frauds as well. Typically, you try and coerce a customer to giving you some data, for example. You try and ask him to go and click a particular link as well, right? And the UPI frauds that you typically saw on Quicker and OLX some time back, where you ask them, you give them a collect request and ask them to transfer, and then say, I'm going to transfer it, and so on. So there's almost always a person sometimes involved, and that actually derails the entire thought process of the genuine customer sometimes, because the moment the person speaks in a very convincing manner, the moment the person does it, I personally have heard of a lot of people, even in like fairly top positions in banks and everything else. I mean, despite all the ads that come, who've gone ahead and given away their OTPs or gone ahead and clicked on this, despite all the advisory that comes, simply because the way it's positioned. And recently we've heard about this whole FedEx parcel and so on and so forth, right? So
Yeah.
ultimately, a person gets involved. How they manage to do it, it could be a combination of anything. It could be a link that they introduce. It could be anything. But I think it's certainly a bit more than this. It has to be a person there. They are quite persuasive as well. The whole Jamtara thing that we've seen and everything. So yeah.
Yeah. Have you had anybody in your circle actually being impacted?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I got to know of one of the large banks. We were working with them, and then we were actually trying to track down these phishing frauds and build solutions around that. And then I got to know that some of the top brass who were actually asking us to build the solution have actually gone ahead and been have fallen prey to that, right? And
Yeah.
given away their OTPs, and that's what's I mean, that's the very thing that they were looking to sort of crush. And it's difficult to say. I mean, I don't quite know how it was planned, what was asked, but it happened.
How can you detect compromised accounts in real time? We've actually spoken about this when we discussed mules. So again, in real time as well, like, I mean, not just at the time of onboarding, but you're also trying to actually validate if that particular device is the device owner is the same as, like, I mean, the identity owner, and also the information which is available on your digital and social footprint is all the same, right? So this is typically how you try and triangulate information available on different sources, and even by looking at your biometric information, all of these things, when you actually triangulate and then see if the person who's logging in, the person who he claims to be by giving his identity documents, and then the person who's using that particular device, and then, or if the person who's entering your login information is all this is one and the same, is what you can actually validate in real time. So you use device intelligence, you use location intelligence, use all of this to be able to actually tell if that particular person is one and the same.